Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. Today with us, Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia. Let's all welcome Prince Dimitri. And Dimitri, it is a great honor and pleasure to have you on Successful Philanthropy today.
Thank you, Jean. It's nice to see you again.
And I'd like to start with your beginnings. Your family was involved as the royals in the country of Yugoslavia, which no longer exists today. Can you speak a little bit about your family and exactly what happened?
So on my father's side, it's the royal family of Yugoslavia and also of Greece through my grandmother, who was a Greek princess. And on my mother's side, it's the royal family of Italy, my grandfather being the last king of Italy. And also Belgium, because my grandmother, the last queen of Italy, was a princess of Belgium as the daughter of the King Albert of Belgium in those days. And we left Yugoslavia in 1942 when there was a communist revolution, and we lost everything. And the same thing in Italy in 1946 when there was a referendum. And again, that side of the family had to leave.
And it's all very sad. Now, as a royal person, your family was involved in many activities in the country of Yugoslavia. Could you describe some of those? Because I think the majority of people in this world have a complete fascination with royalty.
Well, they were the ruling family. So they, my grandfather was what is called the Prince Regent, because when the old king was assassinated in 1934, his son was 8 years old, so he couldn't be the king, the reigning king. He had my grandfather rule for him. And, he was the head of the state and of the government, and they were involved in all sorts of philanthropic things. They created museums and things like that. And same in Italy.
Yes, and when the revolution came or communism took over, what happened exactly to your family? Where did you all go?
They had to go into exile. The coup was staged in the middle of the night. The army, backed by Churchill in those days, surrounded the palace and woke them up and told them that they had 4 hours to leave the country. So they packed as much as they could, went to the station. They had their own train and they just took off and went to Greece, which was south, because the King of Greece was a first cousin of my grandmother, and he gave them hospitality. And then after that, the Germans invaded Greece during the war, so everybody had to flee to South Africa. And then for a while, a few years, they were in Kenya. And under house arrest, because my grandfather was accused of being a collaborator of the Nazis, which was one of the greatest injustices in history, as it was completely wrong, and he's being rehabilitated ever since, and there's been books written about that. And then they settled between Italy, where my grandfather had a property outside of Florence, and Paris, where I was eventually born in 1958. So 12 years after the war.
Yes, and now I understand, I believe you went to school in Paris, and then you migrated to the United States at some point. What exactly was your life like growing up as a prince in Paris, and what has your life been like in the United States?
Well, I started to go to school in France, and then I was sent to boarding school in Switzerland. And then I was expelled from the boarding school because one of the teachers, they were very, very strict, and one of the teachers beat me up with a coat hanger. And I just flew into a rage and punched her. I was 11 years old, and I threatened to kill her. So they got scared and they threw me out of the school. And then they sent me to France, where I stayed in two different boarding schools. And that's where I learned philanthropy when I was 14. There was an organization called Saint Vincent de Paul, named after the famous saint, who looked after very old people. So every Wednesday in school in France in those days, it was day off for children, and you can do sports all day or any activity you wanted. And I chose to join this organization. And every Wednesday, with a friend of mine, we would go and visit very, very, very poor old people in the region, and we would bring them chocolates and things. But more importantly, we brought them company and magazines and things like that, and we spent the afternoon with them. And because they were so old, they were full of wisdom, although they were very, very poor. And they had seen so much during the war, and I learned a lot of things. And the most beautiful part of the year, of course, was Christmas, because we invited all of them. And we hosted something like maybe 50 of these very poor people in one of the buildings of the school. It was a big boarding school in 60 acres of park. And there was a big table, and one of us was seated next to them, the ones we looked after all year round, and the other one was in the kitchen and was bringing the plates back and forth and serving at the table. And we alternated. So one year I was seated next to them, and the other year I was serving the plates on the table. And it was wonderful. I mean, I still have tears in my eyes when I think about it, because when we prayed together, and it was a big highlight of the year. And after that, they spoke about it for the rest of the year and how lovely they had a time at Christmas and all that. And I realized, how much we have and we don't even realize, and how for them the highlight of their week was this one Wednesday afternoon when two young boys came to see them.
And so we are with Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia, and right now he's spoken about his volunteer work at a senior home in France when he was 14 years old, and how important that was, not only for him, but also for the people, the older people in the senior home, and what a great highlight it was for these older people that he and his friends would come in and spend the afternoon with them. Now, before we go on about your philanthropy, Prince Dimitri, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what exactly does it mean to have a title such as Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia? You're no longer a ruling family there, but you are still considered royalty throughout the world. And with that title, I assume there is great responsibility. Can you describe exactly what that responsibility is?
Yes, there is responsibility. And as a matter of fact, when we were growing up from a young age, the education we went through was very, very strict. We were expected to set an example to people. In school, you were supposed to be the most polite boy in the school. You had to always give an example, because, the definition of royalty is that royalty are not celebrities. They are role models, and that is their duty. And for the ones who are still in power today, they are paid for that. And that's what they are supposed to do. It's their work is to, show a good example and give back to the people and of their countries. It was always like that, and in any country, the king and the queen are considered the father and the mother of the country, of the people, a role model couple up to whom you look up to, like that.
And do you think that countries that don't have royal families, such as the United States, are we missing out on what a royal family could offer?
Yes and no, because you have a lot of role models in America. America is a very philanthropic country. You have this incredible culture of philanthropy as I call it, that doesn't exist in other countries. It's a country, it's a gigantic business, philanthropy. We don't have that in other countries as much. And Americans have this, like all Protestant countries, they have this very high sense of duties, of morals, of giving back, of honesty, and amazing values that we in Europe look up to. And that was one of the things that attracted me to this country. Was this real self-disciplines that Americans have about always trying to do the right thing. And that's why I joined many organizations.
Well, thank you. And yes, now for our audience, we are with Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia. His family was forced to leave Yugoslavia when communism took over in 1942. Prince Dimitri's given us a little background on his upbringing in France. And Prince Dimitri, you left France at what age and came to the United States? And then what exactly did you do when you came to the United States?
I came here when I was 26. I had visited New York many times, and I always wanted to live maybe a few years. I didn't know, but I always wanted to spend some time in New York. So I found a job on Wall Street through relations. It was what one did in those days was a training program on Wall Street. So I did that. I wasn't particularly interested in finance, but I thought it was a very good education to have, especially after I had graduated from law school in business law in Paris. And after that, I joined Sotheby's because I wanted to be in the jewelry department. Jewelry and gems and gemology have always been my passion. And thank God, there was one opening in the company, and it was precisely in the jewelry department. And I stayed there for 20 years. It was a wonderful experience. And then little by little, I designed jewelry, and now it's all I do is design jewelry.
Yes, and you have your own jewelry company now, correct?
Yes, Prince Dimitri Jewelry. And I even wrote a book about it.
Yes, and your jewelry, I've seen many pictures of your jewelry. It's very beautiful. It's also very understated. And has your history played a role in how you design jewelry?
Yes, I mean, we are the product of our upbringing. But yes and no. No, because I don't copy things. I get inspired by the decorative arts of all periods, from Indian paisley to medieval decorative arts to Art Deco and things like that. But what I do convey through it is a sense of glamour, and also, as you say, of understatement that you can see in certain royal jewels, and also a sense of movement. My jewelry moves, a lot. It has a sense of balance in terms of colors and visual weight, as I call it. I talk a lot about all that in my book that's called Once Upon a Diamond.
Yes, and how did you decide on going into the jewelry business? Why jewelry versus
because I love jewelry. I mean, I was always fascinated by stones. I used to collect little stones when I was little. Whenever I was in the streets in Paris, let's say in Place Vendôme, and there was Cartier or Harry Winston or Van Cleef, I was immediately completely mesmerized by all these glittering things. And the idea that those were stones coming out of the earth, I would always look on the floor and see, the ground, the earth, walking, and I was always puzzled that you could find things like that inside the ground. Of course, as I asked questions about it, they explained to me that it doesn't look exactly like that you have to cut them and you mine them and all that. But still, I have this fascination about geology and gemology and the evolution of the world and how it got formed billions and billions of years ago, and in the beginnings of the earth, when there was, heat and compression, and certain chemicals got so compressed that, for instance, carbon got submitted to such pressure that it turned into a diamond. And nowadays we see it billions of years later.
Yes, now this show is about philanthropy. And for the audience, we are with Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia. He's spoken a little bit about his family, his childhood, his upbringing in France, and then his migration to the United States. He's also spoken about his jewelry business, but he is also known as a wonderful philanthropist. And since this show is about philanthropy, we are going to switch over to philanthropy. And Prince Dimitri, talk a little bit about some of the causes that are of most interest to you and that you truly like to support.
So I participate in 3 philanthropies. The first one is the Order of Saint Mauritius and Lazarus. That belongs to my family, the House of Savoy. It was at the origin 2 different charities, the Order of Saint Mauritius and the Order of Saint Lazarus, that were created around the year 1000 for the first one and the year 1200 for the other ones. And they were hospitaller orders that went to Jerusalem to heal the lepers and the crusaders when they were on the Holy Land. And we were running it for a while, and in 1570, the Pope, Gregorius XIII, issued a papal bull giving us the gestion of the orders in perpetuity and combining them into one single order, naming it Saint Mauritius and Lazarus. And it's based on the chivalric values of the Middle Ages of helping the poor, the orphans, and the widows. So we raise money today in many countries, and we identify who are the most in need people or organizations around at the moment, and we give money and we raise the money for them. And we had I have a wonderful friend of mine who's the CEO of Neiman Marcus, who became a Knight Grand Cross last year. And now we have this association with Neiman Marcus, and we do events together because my friend of Neiman Marcus is incredibly generous and Catholic and kind. And he wanted to give a new direction to Neiman Marcus and imprint, more chivalric values into the whole organization. So that's what we do together with them and him.
Very
and
nice.
The other order, sorry.
Yes, you mentioned that you had 3 particular
yes.
Focus.
So the other one is called the Casita Maria in New York. I think it's the oldest charity in New York. They basically take children off the streets in the Bronx and all these poor parts of New York, and they put them through school until they graduate, and it's with an emphasis on the decorative arts and music, and we create sort of a whole new generation of artists. And every year we have this event, we raise a lot of money, and we see every year the new class of young children who have made it through the classes from when they were children. And the beautiful thing is we have 100% success and insertion of these people in the active life. And all these people have moved on and become adults with a beautiful, successful life, founding families and having a wonderful job for the rest of their lives. I mean, it's just fantastic.
Yes, and I happen to be on the board of it.
You are, remember, we've been, yeah.
Yes, and what I have seen, the work of Casita Maria is changing the lives of children in a great, great way. They provide after-school programs in leadership and then the arts. And most of the children who go through the Casita Maria after-school programs end up going off to college and then trade school and lead very, very successful lives. And we are based in the South Bronx. And yes, Prince Dimitri, you've been involved for many, many years
yes.
as a leader and as a great helper to Casita Maria. And I want to thank you for that. You mentioned one other
35 years, yeah. And the other order is called the Versailles Giverny Foundation. And in the beginning, it was founded by the mother of Barbara Portago, who was married to the curator of Versailles in the 60s and 70s. And the goal of that was to restore Versailles in the beginning. But now we restore all sorts of other things. We've restored one of the famous mansions in Harlem, where I think Washington even lived at one point. We have restored things at the Metropolitan. We've restored palaces in Sicily, the gardens of Monet in France. I mean, we do also, and it's only based for the arts, which of course is the most important thing, because for me, the arts is really the reflection of a civilization, and without the arts, there's no reason to live in a way, because what are we leaving behind if we don't leave, beauty? Which was, if you go back in time, beauty was the number one fundamental value of the Hellenic cultures. The Greeks of 2,500 years ago, who considered that beauty was the most important value in life in every aspect: physical, artistical, spiritual, intellectual, the beauty of the soul, all of that, which was then, of course, it seeped into into Christianity, and became really one of the fundamental keystones of our world in the West.
Yes, and now, Prince Dimitri, many people look up to you. You have a title, and you are highly respected. What I'd like to also ask my people who come on the show, my guest, is what advice do you give to a young person, maybe just starting a career and maybe just beginning to get involved in philanthropy? What advice can you offer?
Well, first of all, when you get your first job, work hard. Work hard and be humble. And be enthusiastic, and come from the point of view that there are no failures at one point in life. There's only lessons. So if something doesn't go right, you do a mistake, you get yelled at, etc., don't beat yourself up. Learn the lesson. And it takes humility to do that. But with humility comes strength. You see, when I joined Sotheby's, they were all sort of looking at me like, ha ha, who's this prince now? Let's see what he's capable of doing. And they admitted to me before that in the jewelry department, they were all furious. What do we need a prince for? That's it. We're going to have some snob because it's going to boss us around. Ugh, please, blah, blah, blah. So they sent me to the mailroom to open boxes to see if I was going to do it. I was thrilled. I was new. It was America. I was discovering everything. In America, everybody works hard. Everybody is the same. It's a society based on value and competence. I was more than happy to do it, and I learned how to open the boxes, unpack the jewelry, log them in the logbook, bring them to the department, distribute them into the various experts. And at night I was going to gemology school, and before you knew it, it took me about a year. I got my gemology degree, and I did all that. But because I had no problem whatsoever relating to, the people in the post office, to the CEO and Princess Margaret when she was in New York and visiting, or the Queen of Thailand, for that matter, who came to visit us once. For me, it was just a human-to-human experience. So everything went very well, you see. But it's very important to be humble.
Yes,
it makes your life easier also, You don't get hurt as often.
Well, I love your advice, and I love that you've given an example of yourself working in really loading up boxes at Sotheby's when you first got your job in the jewelry department. And finally, we have about a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with?
I don't know. I think I've said everything, more or less. Yeah.
Dimitri, you have been a wonderful guest, and it's been a great honor to interview you, to hear about your family, your young life in France, and then your life in the United States, to also hear about the jewelry company you founded, and then your philanthropy. Thank you very, very much for being a guest on Successful Philanthropy. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy your interview.
Thank you, Jean. It's an honor for me to be able to speak to you because you are the queen of philanthropy, and what you've done in your life is fantastic. And I have a lot of admiration from my heart, deep depths of my heart.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This concludes Successful Philanthropy. Our guest today, Prince Dimitri of Yugoslavia. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.